B2b marketing truth bombs for better results. It's the equivalent of a cold shower, juice detox, and vitamin shots. Yes, every once in a while you need to hear the facts straight, but if you're brave enough to take them, you'll be a lot better off for it. So the buck stops with the CMO. So this week, we'll be looking into where CMOs go rogue and what the best ones do to stay at the top of their game. Equally, if career progression is key for you, you'll get a series of priceless insight to help fuel that journey. Hello, good afternoon. My name's James Rostance, and this is the 414 live and exclusive to LinkedIn Live each and every Thursday afternoon. And the show is for you if you're a B2B a professional B2B marketer, whether you work in-house at an agency or company side, or indeed if you're a company executive with a hands-on role in your company's sales and marketing endeavors. And the purpose of the show is so that you can directly expand and enhance your professional knowledge with each and every episode. And this week, we've got a series of truth bombs on the way. But before we kick things off, we're going to start from now on doing a roll call. It's kind of a Hall of Fame thing for new subscribers and new official friends of the show. So new friends of the show this week include Tanya Gray, Cherie Hickey. We've got Rod Milicevic, Adam Pembry, also joining us, Mr. John Clark, Gary Lee joining, Helen Burgess, Jodie Craggle. There we go. I've got my screen a little bit small. There you go. Mike Borelli, Kerr Matheson, Mandy Pearson, Adam King. Next week I will set the scrolling a little bit quicker, but hey, it's a learning and development process. Mr. George Hughes, filmmaker extraordinaire, Sandra Driscolli, Lisa Meisels, and that's how you pronounce it properly, Patsy Parr, Daniel Pike, and Mr. Toby Brown. There we go. Right. Well, so this week we're going to be looking into how ultimately CMOs can perform better in their roles, and how as a marketing department, you can uplift them and get them to be performing better to deliver better results for your company. So to help with all of this, today, joining me live from San Francisco on the east coast of the USA, please welcome Mr. T. Lim. T, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, good morning, man. We're on the west coast, by the way. So
yes, you're right. I always have to do that. Left, right.
No worries, man. No worries.
And also, it's quite early in the morning for you over there. It's what?
Yeah.
You're minus.
It's 7 now. It's 7. It's 7:30
in the morning.
Yeah.
That's nuts. Thank you so much for getting up early as well.
No. Early riser. It's normal. Appreciate you having me on. So definitely appreciate you having me on, and I enjoyed our conversation previously, and yeah, I'm excited.
Yes, well, to put you, dear listeners and viewers, in the picture. So, Ty's going to come at you pretty much like a B2B business bulldozer. He's got a ton of value to share, and for the large part, I'm going to step back because he's got a lot of stuff that you need to hear, and you'll be very much better off for it. So, hence my rather short and very unique, I guess, show intro for Ty and what we've got in store for you today. So, yeah. For me to set this all up then and to get you going, I shall refer to my cue notes. So let's start with the hanging fruit. So I've got here. Let's start with the low-hanging fruit. What are the main issues that you see that marketers ultimately need to set about overcoming?
Yeah. So first of all, my name is pronounced T. I always tell my kids, you got to just make sure the name gets right. So I'm sorry. So low-hanging fruit. I think marketers in general need to spend more time on marketing fundamentals rather than their technical skill, right? So I think over the last decade, marketers have spent a considerable amount of time in digital and trying to understand things like search, paid social, content syndication, content strategy, et cetera, that list goes on. And through that process, we've just completely stopped asking basic questions like, who is my buyer? Why are they buying? And how do they buy? And then ultimately, when I speak to B2B marketers and they present a strategy, there's some real core things missing. I mean, everyone can go run a funnel or go run a particular social strategy, but ultimately, if you're not doing it for the right person and if you can't psychologically and emotionally tie in to their motivations, it doesn't matter how good you are, it doesn't matter how well you know search, right? So I think ultimately the low hanging fruit for all marketers is to just first start with some basic questions around your buyer. Who is your buyer? Why would they buy? And how would they buy? And if you start to understand those things, then you can layer on all the technical skill, and I think that'll make people better marketers.
How common is it, in your experience, for businesses or companies rather, to not have that covered? It sounds like it's a fundamental. Well, yes, but yeah,
Yeah, it happens all the time.
how much
It
of a
happens
problem
all
is
the
this? Oh,
This is live, right? So I can't cuss, so I'm going to
yeah,
watch my language.
yeah.
Uh, it's very common, man. It's very common. I from as a leader interviewing marketers for particular roles, and then as a consultant working with B2B SaaS companies and their marketing teams, it's very, very common. In fact, if you look at this, first of all, if a company has things like a persona doc and a positioning statement, right, and an actual buyer journey, a lot of it, if you look at it immediately, just looks like something you would find on Google. And while these things are beautiful to look at, when you start to ask some basic questions, such as, well, who does that person report to? What is if they were to get a promotion, what is that next role? Who are their peers within the org, right? Why would they look at this solution and want to make that purchase? Does it actually fit into the initial core initiatives that they're set on solving? And when you start asking those questions, you get a lot of kind of company-centric answers. And company-centric answers means you're in deep trouble, because a majority of the folks who are out here selling product and selling technology are required to go outside of the company, speak to prospective buyers, understand their problems, and then figure out how your solution fits in, rather than most of the statements and most of the docs that I see start with the product and the company first, and say, this is what we sell, hopefully you fit into that. And that's obviously, you're in deep water if you take that approach.
So really, the problem, and I guess such as the thread of today's show.
I'm sorry, man, I lost audio here.
Oh, sorry, I've pressed. Let's try again.
Let's try again.
Uh-oh. You still there?
Uh-oh.
I hear you.
Are you still there?
Yeah, I hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Although I've got.
I've
got a strange echo on.
got a strange echo on.
I know how to fix that. Don't I? Right. So I was I'm putting it over to clarify with you that companies that don't have this sorted and are on top of this on a regular basis, that's ultimately the fault of the CMO. And I was just looking for clarification from you if that's the case or not.
Yeah, obviously it is a CMO's responsibility to educate and build alignment throughout the rest of the org, right? Like, and so, sorry, let me refine that statement. The positioning doc, the persona matrices, although the execution and the delivery is the responsibility of the marketing team, you need to get complete buy-in and collaboration throughout the entire org to make this work, right? All the insights around who the buyer is, how are they buying, what that sales cycle looks like. As a marketing team, you cannot be building that inside some sort of ivory tower. You got to go back into the org and gather all the feedback, and if possible, speak to the customers about it and translate all that into this doc. And so it is up to the CMO to go figure out how to set up the org structure and an environment that allows the marketeers to be able to do this with sales folks, sales engineers, customer success, product managers, the executive team, and the customers. If the CMO doesn't do that, then it doesn't matter how great your product marketers are or the folks writing messaging and brand within your org are. They're in an impossible situation.
So this is really about leadership, then, or rather, in cases, a lack of leadership, which is causing these problems. Is that a fair definition?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is about setting the environment and the org structure necessary in order for the marketeers to do their jobs well. And so because of that, there's a responsibility and accountability to the head of marketing to do this. And I guess let me be clear. It is the responsibility of setting this type of org structure is absolutely on the CMO. And the reason why is because as you think about the org, you cannot expect your CEO, your head of product, or your head of sales to truly understand the idiosyncrasies and the complexities of marketing. Let's just face it, marketing is a really tough role, right? The differences between all the functions in marketing make context switching completely different. I mean, it's completely difficult. So it's unfair, in my opinion, to go ask and complain that your head of sales doesn't understand marketing or to complain that your CEO doesn't understand marketing. They're not supposed to. And so as a head of marketing or a CMO, it is your responsibility to set that org structure and then educate the executive team, including your boss, the CEO, on how this is going to work. And if you do that effectively, then it makes the folks on your team, it makes their job so much easier. It enables them to do their job effectively, hopefully.
When you said that just now, when you said it's not the job of sales teams and the sales department or the CEO to be running the marketing department, I could feel salesmen and women across the country going, yes, we think the same as well.
Yeah.
And equally CEOs going, yes, that's what I've employed him for. Or her.
Exactly. Exactly.
Hey, before I get into the next question, now would be a good time for me to say to everyone watching, if you have a question you'd like to put to T, please do put it in the comment section on LinkedIn Live right now, and I will put that to T. Bang! Wow, as soon as I said that, Gamdan, regular friend of the show, he's just put in his first question. Thank you.
Nice.
Well, you know what? Let's do this in order, shall we?
Gamdan.
You ready?
Let's go.
Gamdan says, you mentioned that we need to find out the problems that the industry faces, then come up with a solution. And he says, let's say I'm in a specific industry and I know some of the problems that are faced. Do we still need to research before offering the service or product?
Yeah. Well, first of all, hey, Gamdan. Yeah. The number one responsibility of the marketing team is to provide market insights, right? And then you leverage those insights to go bring the market closer. So do you have to do research? Absolutely. Absolutely. Every time I write a positioning statement, every time I build any messaging, every time I launch a demand campaign, my main questions aren't just around the buyer, but I even ask things such as, what's everyone else doing? How does our message and our campaign sit in the general context of all the competitors? Now, while I don't think that you should worry about what competitors are doing, but you have to be aware of what they're saying so your message just cuts a whole lot clearer when you actually produce it or deliver it. So yes, I would absolutely require that you do research beforehand, or else who else will? Like that's I guess that's probably the better question, which is who else will? The sales team is closing deals or working on one-to-one deals. Head of product is building product. Customer success is dealing with deployments and support. What other function in the org is going to have the opportunity to go out and try to understand the market and to bring those insights back in? It's up to the marketing team to do that.
Perfectly answered. Thank you so much. Well, that then sets it up nicely for, I guess, my follow-on from that, which is, what are the implications for a business or company if they don't get this handled so that this CMO is indeed leading the marketing department?
Well, you can look on LinkedIn and see the repercussions of it, right? You have sales teams who are complaining about their marketing teams not understanding their plight, the sales process, the customer, content's bad, messaging is bad, campaigns are bad, pipeline suffers, etc. Then on the other end of that, you get marketers talking about, well, I'm driving a ton of leads and they're not converting. But I think ultimately, too, you can look at 100 different websites and then start to say they all sound the same, right? And so I think that's the repercussions of this not occurring. And really, again, we just have to do our job. Our job is to, I guess for me, it's and I don't want to come off in a negative way, right? The positive for me is that as a marketer and as a marketing function, you have one of the best roles in the company. In what other role are you responsible for, or should, number one, go outside of the company and gather more insights, and then come back and tell this huge grand story and take these big swings and push the company to be different and to go past some of their comfort level, right? That's not going to happen when you're in engineering, for instance, right? The marketing department is the department that is able to be big swingers and risk takers. Your job is to take risk. So it's because of that, I think we should definitely embrace that opportunity. And part of that opportunity, though, requires that you get into a little bit of discomfort. Part of that opportunity means that yes, you do have to speak to salespeople and ask them tough questions. Yes, you do have to speak to customers. Yes, you do have to do some research and spend some time kind of translating this into something. But ultimately, that's a fun part. Like, that's a fun part. It shouldn't be a burden. And I think marketers have kind of looked at it as a burden. And to be honest, CMOs have kind of looked at it as a burden because the gravity of execution just kind of brings them down.
With you. Well, okay. In that case, could you paint a picture then of the process that, say, we've got a CMO who wants to step up and lead better and to make changes for the better. What is the process that you prescribe that they should go through rather?
Yeah, there's you have to build alignment within the org, and that happens in a couple of dimensions. And number one is you have to drive and establish common goals. This isn't new. Everyone talks about it. Aligning yourself to revenue could be one of them, but you have to make sure that there's common goals set. Then ultimately, I think you need to start building relationships. So first and foremost, if you as a CMO or head of marketing do not feel like you have a strong relationship with your boss and your counterpart on the sales side, you have to spend time doing that. And there is no magic bullet for this. It is literally the way you would think about how you would build a relationship with another human being. You have to spend time, you have to be honest, you have to be transparent, you have to be human. And so it is only through that relationship, then when you start to have some of that trust, then you'll have a little bit of leniency or some space to actually go experiment, right? But you have to go do that work. And I'm sorry that isn't a marketing tactic at all. This is just, if you want to just be an executive, period, you have to build those relationships and you have to build that trust. And then finally, I think structurally within an org, when we think about our day-to-day processes and how we communicate, this is kind of the boring stuff. But if you understand how to set up meetings and communications in a way where the common goals are communicated well and progress to those goals are constantly communicated, then you automatically, in my opinion, put a foundation in place for you to build that trust, right? And so these are kind of some basic things. You got to know what I'm going to do, and know what I'm going to stand for, which is goals, right? I have to then communicate what I'm doing throughout the entire quarter or the year. So you start to go, wow, he or she promised something. Now he or she delivered on it. And if he or she did not deliver on it, they have an action plan to solve for it. And that gets you that trust that you need. And you just constantly kind of build that human element into it, and things become a whole lot easier. I'm sorry, it actually is that simple. Then you have a chance, right? Then all of it is your marketing strategy, your sales, your team execution that gets put front and center. And then, but at least those are things that you can control. Those are things that you can control, but you have to build an environment where you can get to that point and let your teams excel.
I like your the way that you described basically of treating your counterparts in the organization effectively as customers in the same way that you would treat external customers. You're basically courting and creating relationships. It sounds like that you're prescribing, and doing that internally.
Yeah. It definitely feels like selling, and it'll probably feel like selling for a long time, and that's because it's a very it's a little awkward, I think, in the beginning. And so describing it as selling to a customer or getting buy-in, I think it's a perfect way to put it because it's familiar. As you progress through that process, as a CMO, I think what needs to be clear is that you are actually on a different team, right? The team that you're on is an executive team. And if you're on that team, then really what you're doing is you're just being a great teammate. And then you're creating an environment for the function that you own, which is marketing, to do their job well. And so I think the challenge probably that feels awkward initially is that most CMOs, including myself earlier in my career, we think about, well, my team is my marketing team. And here I am, and then here's the executive team, or here's the sales team, here's our CEO, and I need to make sure that we get credit for things, or I need to make sure that we can execute well. And so there's always that barrier that doesn't get breached, right? So I think looking at it from selling to customers and getting buy-in and that entire process is very familiar and adequate. And there's a lot of similarities until actually like the process in which you want to go through in order to accomplish buy-in. But ultimately, through time, you should start to understand that the team that you're actually a part of is an executive team. And in fact, if you're a CMO who feels like you want a seat at the table, then you got to make it your table, right? It's you're not visiting, you're there. And so once you start to have that mind state and mindset, in my opinion, then things become a whole lot easier.
So it sounds like there's a combination right here of customer care and networking internally. It sounds like those are the two key components of what are ultimately the keys to success. Is that a pretty much on point with what you're sharing?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. When you think about it, right?
Oh, please do. Yeah.
Marketing should be a responsibility of the entire company.
Mm-hmm.
The marketing function is sure owned by the CMO, but the act of marketing and developing a point of view and getting that point of view and that message out there and capturing customers from it is the responsibility of the entire company. So absolutely, you need to network internally because you need to get everyone on board with your strategy. And sorry, yours probably not you need to get everyone on board with your company strategy. It should feel like a collective effort. That's what you're trying to accomplish ultimately.
Okay. Well, I know from when we spoke ahead of the show, you've actually got a framework or a pyramid, I think it was, type framework for communicating how a marketing department led by the CMO is best placed to function and help drive the company forward. Would you be up for just talking us through that and explaining the process in detail, please?
Yeah, the alignment framework, right?
Yes,
I think that's what we talked about. I kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier. I think on one end, you have to go through this process of establishing common goals. And the way you establish those common goals is you have to have a very standard and set structure for communication and meetings. So on one end of the pyramid, you think about common goals. and the bottom end of that pyramid is about meetings and communications. So I'll give some examples of that first. On my teams, we do retrospectives or look backs on the quarter at the beginning of a quarter, rather than try to rush and get it all done at the end of the quarter. On my teams, we do planning in a very collaborative way in the last month of a quarter. And the way all this happens is meeting structure. So we develop things called, for instance, on the revenue side, we develop a what we kind of refer to as a center of excellence, right? Borrowing from kind of the IT world here, where a center of excellence is really a committee of folks who are responsible for revenue. And now you're saying, hey, revenue isn't just a responsibility of sales or marketing, it's a responsibility of the entire company. And this COE meets on a weekly basis. So if you think about and a quarter has 13 weeks, you meet every single week in that quarter. As a part of that meeting, if it's at the tail end of the quarter, then you're planning together. So over the span of 4 weeks or so, you're doing planning, and you're having conversations about the goals, and making sure that you're having that discussion ahead of time, and in a really objective, safe environment, right? So what I mean is, it is much easier to hold your counterparts responsible for maybe lower conversion rates on leads, or to say that goal on leads is way too high, we're going to have to spend a lot of money. It's much easier to have that conversation before the quarter starts, rather than you felt like you had to commit to it, then in the middle of the quarter, you're complaining and whining about it. Mm-hmm. In the beginning of the quarter, though, as you progress into the beginning of the quarter, you're already in execution mode on that plan, but you still spend some time doing a retrospective, because the previous quarter is done. Now you spend some time doing that. In the middle part of that quarter, you're constantly doing updates on a weekly basis on revenue pipeline, leads, campaign launches, qualification, any other things that were agreed upon in the plan. And because you're meeting on a weekly basis at a set standard time with a specific agenda, and the entire quarter has a structure too, by the time you get to the end of the last month of the quarter again, then all of a sudden it's super easy to start to plan, because all the folks who are responsible for executing are privy to what's happening week in and week out. You're kind of actually planning the entire time, right? You're going, well, that makes sense. Maybe we should think about that. And you're just tabling it until that last month of the quarter. That way, the collaboration and the buy-in to what needs to happen next quarter becomes so much easier. And that's just because, again, you have defined what you want to do. You give each other progress on what's happening every step of the way, and you start to build that trust, right? And then so common goals, meeting structure, and communications. Other things around communications that I won't get into are, specific emails that go out to a larger team on an actual specific cadence. Being able to have things like go-to-market radio, where you share with the entire company what's happening within marketing. Specific sessions with very specific teams like product or the SDR team, where you can get feedback and launch things and allow them a forum to ask very specific questions and even hold you accountable and challenge some of the things that you're doing. I think that stuff's important. So you have the common goals, you have meeting structure and communications, and then you finally have, I always now forget, it's so early.
Common goals and objectives.
Common goals and objectives. We have meeting structure, and then man, I'm drawing a blank now.
I've got my notes I can refer to.
Yeah.
So one was planning and retrospectives. The other was communications.
Yes. Yeah. Planning and retrospectives are the other one. I had combined it in there, right? So you have planning and retrospectives that are so critical, and that in itself, there's a process around that. But what I like to do is pull that process into, how you think about meetings and communications, mm-hmm. right? And so you just get in this constant set rhythm with each other collectively, of cross-functionally, because the meeting structure allows you to do that. because there's a strategy to how you set meetings that allows you to do things like planning and retrospectives, that allows you to do things like to set those common goals and have those discussions. You just know on a weekly basis, you're going to be diving in, and everyone has a responsibility to come with strategy and to be really honest about performance. Rather than typically the way things happen is everyone scrambles at the end of the week or at the end of the quarter, produces a plan. The quote unquote buy-in happens in a really fast way. You feel some type of way about it because you didn't necessarily feel like you had a seat at the table or had a conversation about it. You kind of feel forced to commit to it. Then you complain about it the entire time. And you always have an out. In this situation though, if you feel a certain way about it and you didn't speak up about it, guess what? Next week you can. And if over the span of 13 weeks you didn't speak about it, there's something else that's wrong, right? It's not the structure that a CMO put in place. There's a team mate or individual and how they fit into your culture that you need to address. But again, the responsibility for a CMO is to set the environment and the structure necessary for your team to excel in. And that's what I found to be really successful. And then you start to figure out whether, you get the right folks on the team to do that.
The way you've just explained all of that, right now, whilst I don't work in a big corporate, I'm feeling relaxed at the prospect or the idea that there would be no more firefighting. I think that's really the term that springs to mind, which you would otherwise be doing, running around crazily at the end of a quarter, firefighting and dealing with problems. But this way, you're taking back fully control. And as you say, everyone's got accountability and responsibility. And I can imagine this also makes it, I guess, more enjoyable for everyone involved. Well, for the entire team, because there's no panic and scare and horror to deal with.
The firefighting gets contained into a weekly basis, right? So we know if something happens, I don't know, on a Friday or whatnot, and my meetings are always on Wednesdays, unless it's that much of a fire, it can wait till Wednesday for us to have that conversation. And let me be clear, I am not proposing that you should be slowing down. I'm a startup guy, and we're going. But some of these things can hold off. That's one. I think there's also an indirect benefit here, which is you're actually investing in leaders. You're actually investing in the future leaders in the company. When I describe this meeting structure, for instance, in a revenue COE, the CEO, the head of sales, and the CMO is in that meeting. And I guess what I didn't share was that meeting is actually not owned by the CMO. That meeting is owned by the folks who are running growth or demand gen. And so that meeting is owned by the individuals who own demand generation, digital growth, the SDR team, and a head of sales ops, right? The folks who own the funnel in that case are the ones who own the team. Are the ones who own the meeting. Mm-hmm. And so it's up to them to make sure that when they come to that meeting, the updates are all aligned, because the people who they're reporting to is the executive leadership team. So then all of a sudden now you're putting folks who are typically directors front and center, and they have to build a discipline and have to build an ability and a capability to communicate in a very effective way. Yeah, 1 hour, and in that it's split and collaborated against 3 or 4 people. Once you do that over the span of 52 weeks in a year, they just get so much better. It's practice to reporting to the board, right? And so then all of a sudden you can take a step back more and more as a leader, whether you're a CMO or a head of sales, and then you have the future leaders of the company really running point on things, which is ultimately what you want anyway. And you want to be able to focus on other things too.
Ooh, you just give me a thought there. Before we move on, Garrett Karaziz gives you a massive thumbs up for this. He's loving the points you've just made there. So, Garrett, thank you very much, sir. T, you very much appreciated this afternoon.
Thanks, man.
What I was going to say is that I really liked earlier how you'd mentioned that CMOs can't be sitting in an ivory tower, disassociated from everyone. And I think that's a great concept. But just as I was going to say that, you then went on to say how executives could then start taking a step back. Those two concepts kind of seem at odds, or have I misunderstood that in some way?
Yeah. Well, ivory tower for a CMO means you sit in this enclosed space and you make decisions about what's happening, right?
Hmm.
And if marketing is responsible for gathering insights and then translating that into a message to bring the market closer, you do have a team that has to take on some of that responsibility too, and you are taking a step back to allow them to accomplish that and execute on that. You as a CMO though still has that responsibility to gather market insights, develop a message, and think about how to bring the market closer. So with your time, what you should do is speak to more customers, speak to other partners within the ecosystem, continue to develop and refine the message, validate the message, challenge your own message, challenge your own teams with their message, and ultimately you're still responsible for bringing the market closer. Just because that meeting that I referred to isn't your meeting doesn't mean that that revenue number isn't yours. So you should be challenging the future leaders in the company to think in a different way to still accomplish the goal. Like you turn into a mentor, it doesn't mean that you remove yourself from the entire equation. You just now have time to continue to push that envelope even further. And from my perspective, at a more executive level, right? At a more executive level, who else, for instance, is going to be the person that's going to develop the community and the ecosystem around your customers when you think about a customer advisory board or even a customer event? And I'm speaking from the perspective, I'm sorry, from as a B2B SaaS startup guy,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And so the companies that I typically work with and that I'm particularly executing in are anywhere between 30 employees to 400 employees, right? So if you've kind of already crossed that threshold, then obviously some of these things you've already built some momentum. But if you're grinding in a startup, who else would you trust, right, to go build out a customer advisory board or an actual customer event? You should be doing it. You should be out there talking to customers. And that's because who else is responsible for the message, right? You need to facilitate all that as a CMO, not depend on folks on your team. You need to be thinking, I think, on the folks on your team as partners that help you make it better and execute on it. But at the core of it all, you need to be the person that's coordinating and packaging that message initially, the draft of it, right? I think sometimes we hand off too much of the strategic things, and then we
Hmm.
get sucked into the tactical things, and it should be the reverse.
Right. I think right now you've nailed basically the premise of this episode, which is that ultimately it's about the CMO needing to step up and truly be a leader, not just sitting back and enjoying the fact that they're top of the tree. It's about being a
Yeah.
leader, and that I guess is the main truth bomb that you're wanting to, well, encouraging people to embrace and see that as being the case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You got to step up. And that's really what it comes down to. And if you want to be a leader, then you got to stop complaining because you have the ability to affect change within the org and you
Mm-hmm.
have the ability to affect culture within the org. And so it's critical that as a leader, you start to think about structure, processes, communication, alignment, and building that environment again. And then once you've done that, then you have the ability to go out there in the market and start to gather more insights. And that's what being a leader is. And a leader gets out of the way for the rest of the folks on the team to execute and gives mentorship through that. And that would be that should be our goals as leaders. That should be our goals as CMOs. And we got to constantly, in my opinion, on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis, be working towards that end goal. Unfortunately, I think folks get a little bit too sucked into the firefighting, and then a year goes by, 2 years go by, and yeah, it's really tough to change those habits after that.
Well, yes, indeed. Well, with everything covered, what would you like? This now as a summary. What would you like everyone watching and listening to have as core takeaways from this?
I think I think we spent a lot of time on CMOs, and I think for CMOs, the summary for CMOs is to take a step back and understand that you are part of the executive team and start to lead and put in place the structure that it's going to be necessary for your teams to excel in and for your entire marketing function to do its job. And that's gathering insights and bringing and delivering a message that brings the market closer. I think what we haven't addressed so much is that for most of the viewers, you report to a CMO or you work with a CMO cross-functionally. And what happens when that individual may perhaps be struggling a little bit with this. And I think there's a couple of things. I think one, we have to be honest about the situation and just establish those roles and responsibilities again, right? So this comes back to what are the common goals, right? So we get to ask, you must ask and demand from your CMO, what are the common goals? You must communicate that I'm not sure if the meeting structure makes sense. What if we did it this way? I think there is some change that needs to happen, and as marketeers, I think also we can't sit there and say, well, my boss doesn't get it, right? It is also your responsibility, I think, to see if you can drive change within your marketing org and see hopefully that kind of funnels its way back upstream and through the rest of the org. But I'm a big proponent of you have to be proactive. You have to absolutely show empathy. It's really tough to be a marketer, let alone being a CMO and all the context switching that you have to do. So rather than kind of complain about it, it's critical that we start to think about it in a really human way. It's freaking hard, right? Like it's just no matter what facet of marketing that you're in, it is very difficult to be successful. Not only do you have to understand the technical skills necessary, but again, there's buyers buying. And so that component and meshing the two in is going to be difficult for anyone. And so if we start to have those conversations with each other in a really honest way, that trust builds, and I think we can actually build towards something. What I have done in the past and what I still see is that we tend to have we tend to have a complain and watch approach to things, right? And I'm guilty of this too in the past. And I think it's critical now to just say, okay, this needs to change because I'm actually a part of this ecosystem.
So ultimately, you're saying you're part of the solution rather than the problem if you step up with this.
You're part of the solution, yes, if you step up with this. And I guess what I'm also saying about ecosystem is that, I mean, unless you're trying to get out of marketing or B2B marketing, this is going to be a constant problem in your career, because it is happening in many orgs. And so you have to make a decision now that you want to figure out how to fix it. And so maybe it happens now in the org that you're in, or maybe it doesn't, but at least you have learnings to take with you into the next situation. But I'll tell you right now, you can go interview and go talk to people, and the grass may feel greener on the other side. Once you get there, there's a high probability that you're going to end up in a similar situation from an org standpoint. And so you might as well try to fix what you have now and learn from it.
That was a nice way to wrap it. Wow. T. Lim, thank you so much. I really appreciate you getting up so early this morning, because T's over in California. I imagine you're going to go now and do some surfing and hang out with David Hasselhoff, because that's what everyone in California does, right? Yes.
on the East Coast. Yep, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, man. This was a pleasure.
Equally, and Gamdan followed up on that, and he says he really appreciates and about you explaining more really on the role that a CMO should be playing and bringing to a company. So very much appreciated. Well, hey T, over in California, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon.
Yeah, appreciate it. Appreciate everyone out there also. Take care.
Thank you. And indeed, if you've enjoyed watching, then please do subscribe to the show, web address on screen, the414.net for all previous episodes and subscription options, where you can check out the past 2 years worth of the show, actually. Some good evening viewing to be doing in there. And if you're on LinkedIn, of course, like the page, the official 414 company page for the show. Well, there we go. So each and every week, I speak with some of the greatest minds in B2B marketing so that you can directly expand and enhance your professional knowledge to be even more awesome at what you do and deliver even better results for your company. Seriously, genuinely, that's the role of the show. And I go to a lot of effort to make sure I get some really good guests on the show. Great to excellent guests on the show so that you can do that. And I really do have fun doing all of this. Well, hey, I really hope you've enjoyed watching, and please do join me here same time next week.